it is not looking good for Jim Jordan's weaponization narrative. I mean, it's really not. In fact, the House Judiciary Committee just got, honestly, a pretty rude awakening from the very guy they've spent, 3 years now trying to turn into some kind of villain? Jack Smith walked straight into the lion's den, this GOP-controlled hearing that was very obviously designed to embarrass him, and instead of taking the bait, he just lays it all out. The evidence, the reasoning, the whole thing. And suddenly you're sitting there going, wait, hold on, that actually explains everything. Because here's the thing, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself already, but the reason his investigation focused on Republicans wasn't bias. It couldn't have been. The crime itself, and this is the uncomfortable part, required Donald Trump to pressure his own party. That's the structure of it. I've got the transcript in front of me. I've been going through the court precedents he's leaning on, and yeah, the details on those so-called Arctic frost subpoenas that Chuck Grassley tried to turn into some huge scandal. Except when you actually look at them, they kind of prove Smith's point instead of undermining it. Okay, so let me walk you through what actually happened here. This comes from the House Judiciary Committee hearing held on January 22nd, 2026. You're going to see Representative Sidney Kamlager-Dove giving Jack Smith the floor, and it's specifically to address what Republicans keep calling their central grievance, that he targeted GOP officials by subpoenaing their phone records. And, I mean, already, that framing is doing a lot of work, especially since, well, he wasn't even allowed to fully answer the questions they asked him half the time. But watch what he does with it anyway. Smith basically flips the accusation around. He says, look, if a Democrat had committed these acts, then Democrats would have been subpoenaed. But that's not what happened. Trump did this. And the people he tried to pressure weren't Democrats. They were his own allies. So yeah, as usual, let's watch the hearing, and then I'll break it all down because there's a lot going on under the surface here.
California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Smith, for joining us. You know, most people are wondering why you are even here today. But it's because we've heard conspiracy after conspiracy that the 2020 election was rigged. And Capitol Police officers were harmed and died because of those conspiracies. And we have important elections coming up. And the people want them to happen, and they want them to be fair. And the one person who should be telling the truth about elections is the president. But Donald Trump has not and is still not telling the truth about the 2020 elections. In fact, there is a January 6th page on the taxpayer-funded White House website that says the election was stolen from Trump, a blatant, disproven lie he knows is totally false. So one of my Republican colleagues earlier brought up Trump's mind state, that he knew he lost, and he knew that what he was saying was untrue, but that you had no proof. So, Mr. Smith, what evidence did you develop to suggest Trump knew he had lost the 2020 election?
We had evidence from a variety of sources, evidence from people who were close to Donald Trump and who he relied on, people who wanted him to win the election, people who were employed by his campaign to help him win the election. Our evidence is that this was a conspiracy and that Donald Trump specifically sought to prey on party loyalty. Our investigation involved interviewing and subpoenaing records of Republicans because that's who Donald Trump sought to prey on to stay in office. And the reality is certain people refused to do that. The vice president refused to go along with that. People in various states' legislatures refused to go along with that. And the reality is that if we took this case to trial, a good number of our witnesses would be Republicans. If a Democrat had committed these crimes, had done these things, I would have subpoenaed a number of Democrats. I would have subpoenaed their records.
And I'm going to ask you about that. But correct, it's not like he was calling Nancy Pelosi. So why is it legally important to know that Trump knew he was lying when he said the election was stolen?
That was part of our proof at trial, and it was relevant to the charges, specifically to the first charge to defraud the United States. It is permissible for someone to lie, but when they use speech to commit a crime, to facilitate a crime, that is not protected by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has been very clear on that, and this very issue was litigated in the case. The defense raised this very issue. And one thing I want to be clear about today, the case that I investigated and the case we had, it was built to be tried in a courtroom, not in the media. Our case was built to withstand the crucible of litigation, and our assessment was that we had proof beyond a reasonable doubt that would do that.
So what I heard you say is that when you lie, and you know you're lying, and then you act on that lie to overturn the democratic process, that is a felony. A January 6er actually said, if I can't trust him, then who can I trust? Exactly. You know, we cannot even trust our own president. And in fact, there's so many other things that you can say that you're not allowed to say because a Trump-appointed judge sealed the documents, refusing to release the files yet again, which is why we could probably ask you far more questions if those were unsealed. So I know I don't have that much time. I want to now shift to these allegations from my Republican colleagues about the collection of phone records of Republican senators. I guess some of the ones that were trying to get $500,000 of taxpayer dollars. So many of the phone records of members were requested before you were appointed as special counsel, yes or no? That's true? Is that accurate?
Yes,
yeah.
Some subpoenas occurred before I was special counsel.
And what do you say to those who claim you chose to target Republicans because you only collected phone records for Republicans?
The conspiracy I was investigating targeted Republicans.
Right.
As I mentioned earlier.
That's right. And so you would have requested any relevant call records necessary for your investigation of a Republican or of a Democrat?
That's correct. And to be clear, if a Democrat committed these acts, we would have sought those. I could just add one thing. We interviewed Rudy Giuliani in the course of this investigation, and we asked him, why did you, in one of the voicemails he left for the senator, mention the fact that it was Republicans that you were reaching out to? And he said, because the Democrats weren't going to help us, and even some Republicans wouldn't help us. And so our evidence shows repeatedly that the plan was to see if you could prey on people's party loyalty.
Some of the gentlelady's expired. The gentlelady from...
Thank you, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.
All right. So Jack Smith said the quiet part out loud, and I don't even think he meant it as a gotcha. The investigation was full of Republicans because Donald Trump's pressure campaign was aimed at Republicans. Full stop. And there was one claim Smith made that I couldn't stop thinking about, the one involving Rudy Giuliani, because, yeah, that's a bombshell. Smith mentions a voicemail where Giuliani basically admits they only went after Republicans because Democrats weren't going to help them. And when I heard that, I thought, wait, have we actually seen that documented? So I went back into the evidentiary record. The original January 6th committee files, the indictment materials, all of that. According to the House Select Committee on the January 6th attack final report, Giuliani made multiple calls to Republican senators on the evening of January 6th. He's begging them, and I don't mean rhetorically begging, I mean actually pleading with them to delay the certification. The most infamous voicemail was the one intended for Senator Tommy Tuberville, but accidentally left on the wrong phone. And in that call, Giuliani says, quote, Senator Tuberville, or I should say Coach Tuberville, this is Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer. I'm calling in because I want to discuss with you how they're trying to rush this hearing and how we need you, our Republican friends, to try to just slow it down so we can get these legislators to get more information to you. And I know they're reconvening at 8 tonight, but the only strategy we can follow is to object to numerous states and raise issues so that we get ourselves into tomorrow, ideally until the end of tomorrow, unquote. And Smith's testimony adds something new here, something kind of chilling, honestly. During his interview with Giuliani, Giuliani admits the whole strategy was partisan manipulation, not persuasion, manipulation. And here's something the video itself didn't spell out. Representative Kamlager-Dove references a January 6th page on the White House website, and when I heard that, I had to stop and check it because I thought, wait, is that real? And yeah, it is. Since taking office in 2025, the current administration updated official government platforms. Reporting from The Guardian and CBS, news shows that the White House's official history page now reflects Donald Trump's debunked claims of election interference. So when Kamlager-Dove says he knows it's false but publishes it anyway, that's what she's talking about. Now, let's talk about the phone records issue, because Republicans were furious about this during the hearing. They kept saying Smith was spying on Congress, and I thought, okay, let's slow down and actually look at the documents. In October of 2025, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley released a report about what the FBI called Operation Arctic Frost. He drops this list of subpoenas and frames it as a fishing expedition against 400 Republicans. But when you actually read the committee's own release, and I had to reread it because I thought I was missing something, the subpoenas weren't for content. They were for logs, metadata, who called who, when. That's it. They were trying to map who Donald Trump and his co-conspirators were contacting in the middle of the riot, and here's where the whole narrative collapses. Trump called Republicans, Giuliani called Republicans, Mark Meadows called Republicans. Smith didn't choose the phone numbers, Trump did. As Smith himself says, if a Democrat had committed these crimes, he would have subpoenaed Democrats. The bias wasn't in the investigation. It was baked into the conspiracy itself. And this is the most important legal point Smith makes, and I think a lot of people missed it because it sounds abstract at first. He explains why Trump's lies weren't protected speech. When speech is used to facilitate a crime, it loses First Amendment protection, period. He's referencing a very specific Supreme Court doctrine here, almost certainly Gaboni versus Empire Storage and Ice Company from 1949. In that case, the court unanimously ruled that freedom of speech does not shield speech that is an integral part of criminal conduct. And I went back and looked at commentary from constitutional law expert Lawrence Tribe, who wrote about this exact issue during the indictment phase. Tribe explains that the First Amendment doesn't protect a speech act that functions as the mechanism of a fraud, saying, this is a stick-up is speech, but it's also a crime. Smith's argument, he even says this himself, was built to withstand litigation. Trump's lies weren't commentary, they were the weapon used to defraud the United States. And you know what really gets me about this whole partisan witch hunt talking point? The witnesses. Smith says outright that if the case went to trial, a good number of their witnesses would be Republicans. And when you actually list them out, it's kind of staggering. Mike Pence, Republican. Brad Raffensperger, Republican. Rusty Bowers, Republican. Mark Short, Republican. Greg Jacob, Republican. Pat Cipollone, Republican. These weren't outsiders. These were Trump's hires, his allies. ABC News reported that Pence provided contemporaneous notes showing Trump knew his schemes were illegal. So when Jim Jordan and his committee accused Smith of targeting Republicans, they're attacking the very people who stopped the Constitution from collapsing under pressure from their own party's leader. And none of this is happening in isolation. The hypocrisy here is just, wow. Jim Jordan himself was likely included in those Arctic Frost phone records. Why? Because the January 6th Select Committee documented that Jordan spoke with Trump on the morning of January 6th. When that committee tried to subpoena him in 2022, he refused. So let's do a quick reality check. In 2022, Jordan refused a congressional subpoena and said it was partisan. In 2026, Jordan issues subpoenas and says Smith is partisan for checking phone logs. And now we learn Giuliani admitted the whole plan relied on party loyalty. They weren't looking for truth, they were looking for favors. And when they couldn't get them from the courts, and they couldn't get them from Democrats, they leaned on their own people. Now, of course, Republicans aren't taking this quietly. After Smith's testimony, Jim Jordan put out a statement saying Smith admitted his investigation targeted Republicans and that this was election interference. But let's be very clear. He claims Smith admitted he targeted Republicans. The reality is Smith admitted Republicans were involved because Republicans were involved. That difference matters a lot. If you investigate a crime family, you're going to subpoena family members. That's not bias. That's following the evidence. Smith dismantled the entire premise of the GOP's investigation into him. The weaponization wasn't coming from the Department of Justice, it was coming from the White House, aimed at state officials, aimed at the vice president, aimed at democracy itself. And the real tragedy here is that because of the 2024 election, this evidence, the proof beyond a reasonable doubt Smith talks about, will probably never be presented to a jury. It'll live in transcripts, in reports, in history books, but at least now it's on the record. Tell me what you think. Does Smith's explanation of the phone records make sense to you, or do you buy the bias narrative? If you found this helpful, please support the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss future uploads, and yeah, subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for sticking with me.